Hi, welcome back to Talent Thrives Here, our podcast where we talk to talented people and managers in the space managing other folks. I've got back our recruiting panel, Lisa, Mitchell, and Shane. If you've seen us before, then you know we are four recruiters working across North America in different businesses. And so something that's really topical right now is the FTC in the United States putting out a ruling that they are going to make non-competes go away. So I put this over to the panel because as recruiters, we've often been in the middle of signing contracts or helping our clients work on contracts. Some have non-competes, some don't. So I put it out to the panel. Is it affecting, or do you think it's going to affect? Apparently, the ruling doesn't, I think, get finalized till the fall of 2024. So um, it will start to impact, different organizations. But I put it over to you guys. So have you had to deal with non-compete specifically? And what's been your experience working with your clients and in your industries? You want to take
So
that?
yeah, I mean, I can start us off. So I mean, I'll tell you, like, one before we get into how it's impacted our industries. For us in recruiting, we often are restricted by non-competes ourselves. I
Mhm.
know before I started my company, I had a non-compete, and I mean, they're a big deal. I mean, it does make things a lot harder. I definitely understand as a business owner, you've worked your butt off to get, to build your company. I get it and I appreciate it and respect it, having done it myself. For me, like I have an issue a little bit with non-competes just because, I'm okay with non-solicits, by the way. Like non-solicit, just don't take my clients. If you want to go out and
Right,
talk to other
Sure.
people that aren't my clients, that's fine.
right.
Just
Yeah.
don't take my clients. I mean, there should be some kind of time frame for sure. But a non-compete, like sometimes you can take a job and maybe you interview with somebody and you think, hey, these are great people. I want to go work there. And then you work with them and you find out they're not exactly how they were in that interview.
Mm,
And that stinks. And then you're chained and handcuffed, to a role that you can't leave because of fear that you'll get sued or whatever. So yeah, that's a thing where I struggle with non-competes because every person, man or woman, should be able to take care of their family. Like, period. They
right.
should be able to
Yeah.
provide for their family and not be restricted. And not everybody has a good code of ethics and a good moral compass and does the right thing. Everybody's different, but that's, from a perspective on recruiting. And I'll let somebody else chime in and I'll come back around for how it's impacting our industry.
Yeah,
Lisa, Mitchell, go ahead.
I um I don't have my recruiters sign a non-compete. We do non-solicitations and NDAs. And my philosophy as a recruiter, I hate them. I don't like non-competes. I think it's modern day indentured servitude. That's how strong of language I feel about them. Um, so that's personally that's I've never been impacted by one. I've never signed one. I never would sign one. We can definitely circle back on how it's affected my personal space. I got a ton of horror stories from candidates
Okay.
that I've seen, but I wouldn't ever do it because I just ethically don't believe that they should exist.
Right. Right. Lisa, any experience with them?
Non-competes, I think, have been in our industry since the dawn of time
Yeah.
to varying levels. I think my original one was 6 months, so I got out of the
Right.
industry for 6 months. That's no big deal.
Right.
But one of our colleagues actually has a horror story that her past employer had heard that she was working in the industry. She was not, but they actually came to her home to kind
Oh,
of strong arm her and say, hey, so yeah, like you said, Mitchell, there are a lot of horror stories.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, all I could hear was restraining order, peace bond. You know, yeah. My former
Well,
employer wants to come to my house. They got to be 500 yards away. Like,
Exactly.
oh my goodness, that's insane.
no, and
Um,
just and Lance, just to kind of talk about, like, non-competes. So there's some states where they are non-existent. And I know we were talking about this earlier, like California, you know, they don't have non-competes. There's certain states and there's certain professions like attorneys, they don't have to contend with non-competes.
mm,
That's interesting, by the way. compared to everyone
Yeah.
else that knows. But like states that are very restrictive are like Florida and Texas. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a hairstylist, a chef, a cook, like a street sweeper. I mean, you name it. So some of the roles, like in my opinion, they don't make sense. You know,
Mhm.
it's different. Like I can understand if you had the formula for Coca-Cola and you're going to Pepsi. Okay, yeah,
Right.
you can't take our, patent, like, on that um Coca-Cola formula to Pepsi. Sure, that makes sense to me,
Yeah.
but most of the stuff, like, it's just, to me, it's just kind of silly, and it's a way of just restricting you from being able to compete. And to me, it's like if you just treat the employee right,
Right.
they'll stick around with you. Like for me, like I don't want to have people sign a non-compete. I mean, I'm against them. I know sometimes people have recommended to do them, but anymore, like if I'm hiring people on my team, I want people that want to be here for the right reasons.
Sure.
You know,
Well,
if not, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I in my, I don't know, early career, I had a lot of sales, marketing, account management roles. Non-competes were in there all the time. Non-solicitation, they were basically afraid that we'd come in for 3 to 5 years, learn about all of their clients and all of their pricing information, and then run over to the competition and say, here's what their margins are, and so on and so on. And so we signed them many times. And to Lisa's point, you'd go to a vendor instead that's just adjacent to the industry so you could keep working, and then run out your non-compete and then go back to the competitor potentially, right? Because that competitor wanted that information. There's no doubt about it, right? But um, what I remember years ago was, I think it started in California, where the laws were more, the motion was, hey, you can't stop an individual from making a living and earning and
Exactly.
feeding their family, right? That was kind of the spirit of how this started to shift. And up in Canada, I remember it impacting a lot of the labor laws up here as well, because that was the sort of underlining statement was, and if you want to put that person on the bench, on the beach, or I think the Brits called it garden leave, you have to pay for it. 3 or 6 months you can't be in the industry, but here's the 3 or 6 months severance package to keep you on the bench, right? And so then there was a fair kind of thing, like, and I've seen it for CEOs, literally 2 years. Like, you have to be out of the industry for 2 years, but they'll pay you a severance because it's a CEO and he or she has critical, mission critical kind of information. I could see where that's makes sense. But again, they're paying for it, right? And I've had many executives I've worked with the exact same thing. Dude, I can't get back in the business for a year, or I'm running off my non-compete and I've got another 6 months left on it. So, if they want to have conversations right now, that's fine. But my start date has to be at least 6 months out. I can't get in. So I've
And
seen those.
well, and to your point, like for the executives that have to wait out a year, 2 years, they get a pretty like sizable severance to where
Yeah.
they're going to be able to pay their bills
Yeah.
moving forward for a while, like versus struggling and risking losing everything.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if you have a non-compete, as long as they say, hey, if you got a 1 year, we're still going to pay you a year's salary. Okay, I can do that. But if
Right.
not, like there's got to be some kind of swap. And I know that, the theory is like, hey, we paid to train you and this and that. I mean, that's kind of the cost of doing business,
Yeah.
I'm just, I don't know. In our industry too, like people are worried about, hey, are you going to take my clients and candidates? I'm like, hey, guess what? Everybody's got LinkedIn, everybody's got access to the internet and Google
Right.
and Facebook, and it's not hard to find any of these people. I mean, so anyways.
Yeah, no, and that's it, right? Yeah, I think, the term I heard years ago was paper tiger, right? If something's written as a law on paper, but the paper has no real enforceability, then it's just a paper tiger. It's not a real tiger, right? So, um, but Mitchell, you said you've got some horror stories. I'm curious if you could share one or two of them, of anything that's happened with people in your industry.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And just one quick note for all the listeners, because I don't think we covered this and touched on it. So non-competes are still valid for what they're calling senior executive leadership. I don't love the way they defined it, because all they said was if you make more than, like, I don't remember, 151,294, I want to say is the figure, but 150 and some change That's how they define that. I don't feel like that's very future proof or realistic. And then it's unclear. It said annually, but is it base? Is it total comp? Um, so anyways, they're still around and they will still protect for those senior executives with all the mission critical information. Um, Man, but horror stories in my industry, there's a company who will go nameless that chases every non-compete to the end of the earth.
Right.
And they even they have attorneys in house. They send out the letter to every employee, whether it's a labor technician
Yeah.
or a high level person. You all get the cease and desist letter. They don't necessarily take it further than that with everybody. They pick and choose who they want to go, but they can at least say, hey, we're not picking and choosing, because we do send the cease and desist letter to every person. But with certain people, and I've seen it with project managers, like that's not a revenue driver. There's no trade secrets. They're
Right.
reconstructing a house, right?
But
I'm
it
in that
probably
construction space.
scares the bejeebers out of them, right?
It does, yeah. And it's not just them. Like I've had clients when I'm recruiting one of their people say, "Oh, they're from XYZ. We're not even going to pursue them. We know they're coming after their non-compete." So
Wow.
even with the employees that don't know it's hindering their career advancement, because of that company's reputation, other companies won't touch the individual because they know the aftermath that's going to follow them. It's real greasy. I know of a guy that was told by a VP after a major weather event. His office did several over 100 million in his location, which is huge. And he was told by a VP, you know, you're going to be worth more gone than for the company to keep you.
Wow.
And he called me and told me the story and was like, I know I'm getting axed within 30 days. They're not going to pay me the bonus that I'm owed. What do you got? Super talented leadership person. And it's he will never come back to restoration. Every leadership role that comes up, I call him like, hey, no, I'm not ever coming back. And I'm just, you ran great talent totally out of the industry and damaged the industry because you wanted to save a buck.
Riley, if I could jump in, that reminds me specifically of a story where an executive team came to me and said, this individual's left the company, but some of the social media posts look like they're kind of solicitation and so again, we had to draft a letter and have legal go over it and stuff. And to your point, it soured that executive so badly on the organization. And that was like, that's the lasting impact. It's like, doesn't want to work with those folks again. Now is probably bad mouthing them. I don't understand why they don't look at where that's going to go, because at the end of the day, that individual that left wasn't harming us in any financial way, shape, or form. There was nothing to say this person's taken, $300,000 worth of revenue, therefore we should pursue. So the cease and desist letter was really like, waving our sword from the window up 10 stories up, like, hey, don't do that. But and it goes all sideways, and it hurts. I think it sometimes hurts the reputation of the company because, did he or she leave on good terms? Why don't you keep the good terms going? But it seemed like, on, this third page of your contract, this one phrase here, we're now allowed to send you this letter and piss you off, basically is all it did. Right. And I don't know. I've often wrestled with them. And in my mind years ago, it was like, hey, let's look at the business case. Are they going to impact our revenue first? Let's look at that. Is there any way, shape, or form this is going to do major damage? Because if it's not, just let it go. Go get some more business and be a good company and pick up, keep moving forward rather than this. I get sort of excited by some of these non-competes, non-solicitations, the restrictive covenants and contracts. And I don't know if you found it, but in my experience, I remember being with a big multinational for a few years, and the contracts felt like they were written 25 years ago. They were so onerous. I thought, who signs these? And we were working with a couple senior executives trying to get them hired at this big company. And I went toe to toe with their HR team. I just said, I wouldn't sign this myself. Why are you asking someone to sign this? And they said everyone signs them. And I said, well, then you have to show us what you're going to give for all these restrictions you're putting in place. Oh, no, this is the way we do it. And it was, they wouldn't flex. It was highly bureaucratic. And we lost two very high powered performers in the negotiations due to the fact that they wouldn't strike it off their contracts. They just, the HR team's like, this is our format. This is our boilerplate. This is what we do. And I eventually stopped working with them, quite frankly. It was backwards. It was very draconian and I don't know, archaic and and I also said like I don't think it's even enforceable. So if it's not enforceable, why are you writing it in your contract? You're just pissing people off. And also the trust right at the gates. Like we've courted you for several weeks or several months in some cases, had a lot of, great conversations. And then HR sends the document or legal sends the document and it's not in the same spirit as all the conversations. All the interviews were like, we'd love to have you a part of the team and blah, blah. And, when you sign on, we're now going to put the following 6 sets of handcuffs on your career. I don't get it. I don't, but someone help me. I think I'm up on a soapbox alone for a minute.
No, you're good. The biggest thing I would tell people is if you're ever in a situation where a potential employer wants you to sign a non-compete, you really need to seek legal advice before you move forward to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
As far as how this will impact like our recruiting world. I mean, I recruit on a little bit of everything. Recruiting is recruiting. So I do enjoy construction. So sometimes similar to Mitchell, I'll do estimators and project managers and things like that. And I know in states, particularly in Florida and Texas, where they're very, they are enforced. A lot of times we have to find people out of state that are moving and
Yep.
relocating. So it makes it exponentially more expensive for them to attract talent. Once
Right.
those go away, if those go away officially, once they get resolved through the courts, that's definitely going to change the landscape and it's going to potentially make our lives a lot easier to find people in their backyard,
Mm,
like from a recruiting perspective. So my advice to the owners would be, hey, I'm okay with the non solicit, things like that, but just treat your people right. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like if you treat them right, they've got no reason to leave.
yeah.
So
But until then, I think that the courts, until it's actually ruled on, and then, like you said, maybe state by state, it's going to be different. I think our court systems are going to be so tied up
Mm,
with this and that and nitpicking and all that kind of thing that it may jam things up there as well.
mhm.
Yeah, I've got a fear thought that I saw somebody post on LinkedIn that got my wheels turning. If the courts strike down the rule, which could happen, the FTC probably, I'm no legal expert, but from everything I've read, I don't think they have the authority to make this broad of a rule. So if that happens, does it empower employers to pursue them even more than they have been? Right.
Right.
Like now they feel empowered and they know that this is going away, so that could be a really reverse outcome that people aren't thinking about, and this could swing like a pendulum the polar opposite way.
Yeah.
Right.
But to your point, Mitchell, and this is not necessarily a question for an answer, but if the FTC doesn't have the authority, who does?
I'm not the smart enough person to know that answer, but I'm with you. Yeah, who does? I think when I listened to the vote live, because I stumbled across it by blind luck, two really interesting things I wrote down. One of the dissenting members that voted against it, one of his reasons for voting against it was their economist with the FTC was projecting this is going to cost businesses $480 billion in increased wages and benefits.
Wow.
And I'm thinking in the back of my head, with the middle class and lower class being crushed by inflation in the United States, is that a bad thing? Like,
Right.
Okay.
And
That's an
why
interesting
is it?
reason to vote no, but okay.
But why is it going to cost that?
Just, I think it's going to create a talent war like we saw post pandemic, right? After the
Oh,
great
okay.
resignation, you saw
I
all
see.
this talent changing hands. And just in my industry alone, I'm a salary expert in my little space. I saw salaries go from probably a 20 to 30% jump across the board. And that was even at the lower level. And that was 2 years ago. Now, if non-competes go away and people can really start changing jobs, it's going to really increase wages, which, employers, I don't know how it would affect benefits, but employers might have to increase their benefits to be more attractive to retain people, things like that. It's just going to create a more competitive landscape. So
Kind of like toilet paper during COVID becomes
Yeah.
more valuable.
yeah.
Yeah. But to your point, Mitchell, our industries too that we deal with, same thing. Salaries climbed about 25-30% right after the pandemic. Um, and employers were really wrestling with that because their budgets hadn't gone up the same amount on the projects they were working on. So there was a real reset going back to the sort of the root of the problem of like, how do we increase the budgets now? And one of the things they started to do was offshore more of the work to Asia because that was a way they could find a better margin again. Because the top line on the budgets really didn't move. So you imagine, I think labor on a lot of jobs is the biggest line item on any project, right? So if your salaries have gone up 25%, you're feeling squeezed. You've got to find something cheaper, or some way of clawing even a third of the project with an outsourced vendor that hopefully gives you. I mean, I worked in the auto industry a million years ago, and I remember we would bid on projects that were going to get awarded 2 years later. And so we often had to bid somewhere around cost or like plus 3 to 5%. And then the auto industry would just say, you figure it out. You've got 24 months to figure out how you're going to make margin on it. We don't care. Like it was such a commodity pricing scale
Right.
that we basically had to, and we knew there were so many other vendors bidding. You had to bid almost at cost and then beat up your suppliers for 2 years or figure out some other way to build in some margin. The volume was high, so the margin was low, but I just remember it was quite a weird game to see behind closed doors, and that was somewhere where there was a lot of competitive information
Yeah.
and lots of non-competes in the auto industry because nobody wanted somebody's Ford's business going over to somewhere else and that sort of thing. But
Lisa, have you seen it on the insurance side of things?
I really don't have to face that usually. Sometimes, emphasis on sometimes with regard to a producer, but generally not.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was going to say in the accounting and finance world, sometimes as well, it's kind of depends on the industry. I know seems like construction, they'll enforce it more so with non-competes in the accounting and finance world. But not every industry has you sign them.
Yeah.
Shane, sorry, Mitchell. Shane, I found that interesting only because I would think accounting, they would have all sorts of critical data, on all the nitty gritty on a company. How long does it take to pay its bills? What
Pricing
are
up
things?
that jazz. Yeah,
Yeah,
pricing up that jazz too. Yep.
I always think canary in the coal mine for accounting. Like if the accountants start to leave, something they know, they know if the company's healthy, right? Because they're on the pulse.
Right.
Well, to your point, yeah, when you see accountants leaving, like they see the financials and
Yeah,
they know the ship is sinking.
yeah,
So my advice to people at any organization, be friends with your accounting and finance folks so you
yeah,
know the health of the
right.
organization, because if you see that they're leaving and a whole bunch of their friends in their department,
Yeah,
you know, keep your eyes peeled.
yeah,
Well, and that
Interesting.
applies to vendors as well, right? Be friends with the accounting department.
yeah,
Good point. Never thought about that.
yeah.
And
Well, and the date on payables, that's why I often think like if they normally pay all their suppliers in 90 days, but all of a sudden that's becoming 120 or more, that's a critical kind of KPI to keep your eyes on, right? So,
Yeah.
and again, the accounting team knows that daily, the payables team anyways, they can see like, and they're running reports on it all the time. Yep, we're definitely 150 days out or something like that. So,
well, they'll be
but
able to see their cash flow. And to your point, the days sales outstanding, that's the calculation that you're referring to.
yeah,
But
yeah. Mitchell, sorry, I think I cut you off. Were you going to say
No,
something?
I was just gonna say I think I don't have non-competes derail a lot of deals, but I do know, and I see candidates tell me, "Hey, I'm under a non-compete. I'm not interested in making a move." Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think there'll be more people that come into my funnel, um, and that'll fix a lot of problems that the restoration space has. But our space is intriguing because it's a very untransferable skill set people have
Mhm.
developed, right? If you know how to estimate and exactimate, which is the platform insurance companies require you to estimate in, the only industry vertical on the construction side that uses that platform is insurance restoration companies. So you go to new construction, they're using, Timberline, Blue Team, all these different types of pre-construction estimating softwares. They don't use Xactimate. So you could jump to the carrier side, be an
Right.
adjuster. Otherwise, you've built up this worth and this skill set to feed your family, pay your bills, and all that type of stuff. That's not transferable.
Right.
So that's one thing I see a lot of candidates make the argument in courts, and I hear from others is like, hey, I've got a skill set that's increased my worth. I can't just go take this somewhere else, right? Like finance. You can jump to any vertical that's not yours and it's a transferable skill. Most of the production side in my business has an untransferable skill set, so they're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So it's a real problem that I'm sure people silently battle with and don't speak up and talk about.
And Mitchell, how does that affect you and what you do?
Oh, I mean, it's twofold, right? Like on one hand, it's hard for my clients to find good talent because it's such a niche skill set. It takes so long to learn it. You can't just grab somebody from construction, stick them into restoration and say, go. So from that standpoint, it's a good thing on the business development side. Like there's a need for somebody like myself because it's hard to find people. Um, Flip inversely though, it's hard to find candidates. So it's
Mhm.
hard to fill the roles. So you do less BD, you do more recruiting. It's tough to get people to make moves. I'm sure non-competes are impacting more deals than I'm aware of. I just don't really think about it or focus on it until like the end, right? I've had a couple times where it's like we're at the finish line and now my candidate is worried about the non-compete that my client has in place, right?
Yeah.
And do they enforce it? Do they chase it? Do they have that reputation? I don't work with a company that operates that way or has that mo. So it's easy for me to reassure them and let them know, like, hey, I know the companies that do chase it and I won't work with them. I just ethically I don't agree with them, so I'm not going to align myself with those kinds of businesses.
Yeah. Does it have to do not only time wise, does it also have to do distance wise? Like you can't work within 50 miles or you can't work within 1,000 miles.
Yes, all of them have to have a radius from what I know. I don't know of any states that don't require a radius. So they have to have and it's supposed to be a narrowly defined radius, but every
Right.
state is a little different about how they interpret narrowly defined radius. I've seen some that are 200 miles. Like, how's that
Wow.
narrowly defined? And it's still held up in that state, Florida.
Yeah.
Well, then
Um,
one more question from that. Just say I'm in your space and I'm working for ABC company, which is next door.
mhm.
But there's a company that will hire me remote, 200 miles away. Now are they going to chase me?
They might.
Yeah.
Like it's possible they might. um I do a lot of coaching with candidates on when they are making the move. Okay, let's talk about your non-compete. Do you have one? Do you have the language? I'll read it. I'll let them know I'm not an attorney, but hey, here's what I'm seeing from my experience. Talk to a labor attorney. I know a lot of labor attorneys that'll talk to people and review them for them for a pretty cheap price. Everyone is different. I would imagine if you're going remote, let's say you're doing remote estimating, probably not. They're probably not going to chase you because you're not impacting their business. Bulk majority of the companies in my space don't chase the non-competes. I don't want restoration to sound like this big bad world. Bulk majority of them are we'll take care of our employees and they'll stick around.
Right.
But there are some that abuse it. And it's the ones that abuse it that create the horror stories that are just ruining it for the other business owners that are trying to do the right thing, just trying to protect their business. But every use case I hear in defense of non-competes always boils down to, well, an NDA would cover that. Well, a non-solicitation would cover that,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Yeah, no, good points, Mitchell, for sure. Yeah. And it's interesting the distance thing. I've seen too where somebody's like global head of something as their title, and they will say the territory is all of North America. Like it's pretty onerous, right? You've got to basically leave North America to work, and that's one where I would push back for, well, if that's the case, then you got to pay for the garden leave. You got to pay me a severance, to balance out the fact that I can't play in the place that I've now got 15 or more years experience. So.
Well, and when
What's
and when
the,
when non-competes are, and sorry, Lisa, I'll just if it's okay, I was just going to say, if non-competes are too broad, they will not be enforceable
Yeah.
in a court of law. Like they have to be very specific and defined, and they have to be reasonable.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
oh, I was just going to ask, what is the greatest distance that you have seen in a non-compete? Or can you even answer that?
I've seen North America. That's the
Have
biggest one
you?
I've seen. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. But
insane.
again, like, vice president of sales and marketing for yada, 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 and their marketplace is North America. But again, in that situation, we pushed definitely for that, like a balance of, or you can strike down the duration, say, because they'd asked for a year and we'd say, like, that's ridiculous. What about 6 months? But you're gonna have to pay the six. Well, we're not paying the 6 months. Well, you can't make the person not work for 6 months.
Mhm.
So you either want this executive to come work for you or not. And we get into kind of that kind of who's got the hot potato this week. Like, either you commit to it and you make this person's life great and he or she makes your life great and away you go. But I do find, again, I go back to that sort of thing, like, and this is why I think probably California challenged a lot of these years ago. What's fair? Because if the employer has such a heavy hand, then you're going to have to accept it and go, or you're just going to have to avoid that employer because the value of what you're getting from them isn't worth the, all these restrictive covenants that are put in place. So, and I saw them up in Canada many years ago in certain areas, not all of them. Ontario is kind of very progressive with this, and I think British Columbia was doing the same, where they were again saying, the duration has to come way down, or it has to just get out of the contract altogether. And again, non-solicitation made more sense, or an NDA made more sense.
Mhm.
But you can't stop somebody from earning a living. You just can't.
And
But
that's the bottom line, right? You
well,
can't make them.
you'd love to think it is, but some states will tell you otherwise, right? They'll say no. This is what I'm curious too. Back to your point about, I think Mitchell might have said, like, we might see other states now put in more legislation that they didn't have because they're watching what's going on and going, oh, well, maybe, and politically, if they're going to protect the employers group, some of the politicians, again, Mitchell, you brought up that, the dollars involved. They might say, depending on who's looking at it, if they're looking at the side of the workers, then they'd say we have to strike these things down. But if they're, looking after employers and employer groups and employer communities, they're going to say, no, we have to put more restrictions in. So it may cause, as you said, I think your fear about this, it may cause that. We might see more than, I think there's 9 states that have legislation currently that override the FTC. So maybe we'll see 10 or 12 or more, getting on the bandwagon, so to speak. And again, to protect politically, it might become the thing that we see motion on, I think. Anybody want to chime in any other bits and pieces on the FTC or non-competes, or do you think we've covered most of it?
The only thing I will, does anybody else want to say anything? Because I can end this on a good note.
All right, great, Shane, go for it.
Take it away.
Is it, anybody or no?
You're
Okay.
prepared, Shane.
So I'll tell you, for me, when my non-compete was over, I felt like if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson,
Right.
being Sir William Wallace, at the end he was like freedom.
Yeah.
So I wore my shirt. Hopefully you can see it.
Yeah. Excellent.
I
Great.
was so excited to be, unchained and unleashed. But I'll tell you, like the one good thing that came out of that non-compete was it made me better and it made me a force to be reckoned with because I had to figure stuff out like quickly. Didn't have time to dilly dally. So, anyways, thanks
You
for
and
having us. Yeah, or good.
I was just going to say, you and some of the other people that we all know have a whole different attitude. I've always had the attitude is chase me if you can. It's I've never let it really stop me. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not by any stretch saying
No,
it's
it's
right,
okay.
but it's my big bird to whoever, you know.
and I'll tell you, like, I could have fought it and all that jazz. I didn't. I just let it go. I was like, you know what? I signed the daggone thing. It sucks. It is what it is. And I mean, that first year it sucked. It was really hard. Like,
Yeah.
really hard trying to raise the family and provide for them. And
And you
um,
can't dance fast enough.
yeah, you can't
Yeah.
dance fast enough. But it helped me to be better and be more gritty and feisty. And I learned a lot the hard way, which was good. So now I think I'll be in a better position moving forward because of it. But I still don't think certain professions, like, they shouldn't have them. Otherwise, like we've said, at least pay them for the duration of whatever that non-compete is, whether it's 6 months or a year, like, so that they can pay their bills and take care of their family.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Great. Mitchell, Lisa, any other final thought? Do you have t-shirts you want to expose as well? Or no?
I don't have a freedom t-shirt like
All
Shane,
right.
but I was like a kid in a candy shop as I was watching the vote happen live. Kind of just holding my breath as each person voted because there's only 5 members. So it was like at one point it was 2 no's and 1 yes, and I'm like,
Wow.
are they really gonna vote this down?
Wow.
But yeah, I was thrilled. I'm not a big fan of how they defined executive leadership. Just you make more than 151,000, like you still need a leadership title. Like there's so many questions that I have circling that one very broad stroke language.
And,
Yeah.
and there was something in there about, like, I would caution people on cautious, be careful with titles. And they said, like, if you help influence any of the processes within the organization. So if it were me, rather than trying to go for that higher title just for looks and appearances, go with the lower level title, and just do your thing. And that way you're not restricted by that because, sometimes it's perception matters, right?
Mm.
I wonder how many candidates are going to ask for 149,000.
Yes.
Not a
Right.
dollar more either. I want that on a base.
Yeah.
And does that 151 count bonuses or any?
It said annually. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't define base commission. I mean, annually, I know estimators that make that much money. So are they now executive leadership? Like,
Mhm.
there's a lot that needs more. I mean, it's to me, it was just a horribly thought out
Right.
and horribly written rule. Very,
Well,
very half-hearted.
and salaries are different across the US. Like if you're in, Mountain Home, Arkansas versus San Francisco, California, and
Right.
I knew you would appreciate that, Mitchell.
The mayor.
Running for mayor right here. Anyways, cost of living's a lot different. So
Yeah.
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 I think it has been helpful to politicians and to attorneys,
Yeah.
like you
To
said.
attorneys for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa, I'm detecting a rebel gene in you.
I have kept my mouth shut this whole podcast.
Anyways, look, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see you again next month. We'll tackle some more topics all around this, but I really appreciate everyone's time and commitment. Thank you all.
And didn't we decide that next time we're talking about the inequality in salaries?
That'd be great. Yeah. We'll
Just
put
to
that
give a
on the
little
board.
teaser too.
No, I like that. Yeah, yeah. Pay and equity, and yeah, there's still, I think, one of my guest speakers the other day said there's still like 72% male-dominated industries. And the
It's-
salaries are not equal. So yeah, that'd be great to chat about next month.
Insurance being one, construction being another. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Take care. Have a great week. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.